We're going to talk about tech and real estate today. Two fantastic speakers, Robin Chase, who's also the Nichols Prize winner, and Brad Greiwe. Going to give you very brief bios. If you want to hear more, I'm sure everyone here knows how to use tech to look up on the internet what their more detailed bios might be. So Robin's a transportation entrepreneur. She's a co-founder and former CEO of Zipcar, which is the largest car sharing company in the world. I'm sure everybody knows Zipcar. And also the co-founder of Venium, which is a network company that moves terabytes of data between vehicles and the cloud. And she has a recent book out, Peers Inc., How People and Platforms Are Inventing the Collaborative Economy and Reinventing Capitalism. And currently, Robin's passion is working with cities to maximize the transformation possible with the introduction of self-driving cars. So we're going to talk about that quite a bit. As I said, she won ULI's Nichols Prize as an urban visionary. She is one of Time's 100 most influential people, Fast Company, Fast 50 innovators, and Business Week top 10 designers. So top 100, top 50, top 10. Graduated from Wellesley College, MIT Sloan School of Management, was a Loeb Fellow at Harvard, and received an honorary doctorate of design from the Illinois Institute of Technology. Brad Greiwe is...
Don't read my bio. Don't read it.
No, I think Brad's okay too.
Thanks everybody.
Brad Greiwe, ladies and gentlemen. So Brad's not a slouch either. So Brad's co-founder, managing partner at Fifth Wall. Fifth Wall is a venture fund focused on technology for the built world, backed by the largest owners and operators of real estate, hospitality, and retail environments throughout the world. Prior to Fifth Wall, Brad was co-founder and CTO of Invitation Homes, which was largest owner and operator of single-family rental properties in the U.S. and backed by Blackstone. Brad started at UBS investment banker in real estate lodging and leisure group. He then worked in real estate private equity, Tishman Speyer and Starwood, so banking background and real estate background. He's from Cincinnati, lives in San Francisco, and graduated from Harvard with a BA in economics. So the format here, Robin's going to give her presentation, Brad's going to give his presentation, and then collectively we're all going to have a conversation about that with the time remaining. So I'm going to hand it off to Robin. And she's going to take it from here.
So I thought I was going to stretch, even though I'm working on self-driving cars coming into cities, I had been doing other work, and so I'm going to talk about this other work because I think it's going to stretch your minds, and then we will move to self-driving cars, and we'll have that in the Q&A. So, new ideas. I do a lot of work thinking about the idea of sharing, and so this is what the focus of this talk is today, is this sharing. There's this new organizational structure that has changed the way we build businesses, the way we work, and ultimately how we shape economies. And that's what I'm going to talk about, and there's 3 building blocks to this new organizational structure, and that is excess capacity, people, and I see the word gone, platforms. So these 3 elements are what's happening, and I'm calling this new organizational structure Peers Inc., where people and platforms are inventing the collaborative economy and reinventing capitalism. If we look at this, all of these companies are platforms that we've been talking about for the last 15 years. All of them are leveraging excess capacity on a platform, inviting in the participation of others. And I'm throwing down all these other things. So if I think about the free and open source movement, I think of that as a Peers Inc. collaboration, or WhatsApp and OkCupid are Peers Inc. collaboration. When we talk about crowdsourcing and crowdfunding, Peers Inc. collaborations. An interesting piece when I think about this idea of leveraging excess capacity, it is fundamentally an act of sharing, because I'm saying I'm not controlling that whole asset. I'm having to share part of it with someone else. And my favorite example here would be bed sharing. So I don't know if you guys do any bed sharing, but I do a lot of bed sharing. I travel a lot, and I like to stay at friends' houses and stay in their multi-purposed home office bedroom. And if I'm really lucky, I get a double bed Yahoo. And if I'm really unlucky, they told the teenager, you can sleep on the couch, Robin's going to use your room. And I think, oh my God, no way in hell. And that's why we have hotels. Hotels are bed sharing. And when I did Zipcar, I was telling my staff, please don't call it car sharing. You're going to have to, people don't like the idea of sharing. Imagine if we called hotels bed sharing. So I went and I used one last night, as some of you might have. How many people put their head on that pillow before you? So I went to do some research. What was the largest bed-sharing companies in the world? And so the Intercontinental Hotel's been around for 65 years, 650,000 rooms in 100 countries. And we can know that that was really hard work because the Hilton hotels in 93 years did not build that capacity. And you know what I'm going to say next. Airbnb, in its 4th year, had 650,000 rooms. And this is where I say, can you believe it? I'm sure you guys are all traumatized and like an entire sector disrupted in 4 years. Like, what in heck? How did that happen? And then Couchsurfing, in its 9th year, had 2.5 million places to stay in every country. And I just have a little piece here that Airbnb recently had another round of financing, and they were valued at $31 billion. And I think they're 7 years old. So the question is, what in heck is going on? Why is this happening, and how can we participate? So if I think about why did we invent companies and institutions and governments? We invented them to do things that we as individuals can't do. And I think of those as industrial strengths. And so what are those things? If it's going to cost millions of dollars, don't ask Robin Chase. I don't have millions of dollars to spend on something. I have to invent a company to do that. If it's going to be something that requires lots of kinds of intelligence, I could be brilliant at 2 things. If it's going to take 10 things, I have to bring together a bunch of people to get this thing done. If it's something that's going to require standards and standardization, I am an individual. I can't force a standard on anyone. We have to have something much larger, a bigger entity to say, hey, this is the standard. It's going to happen this way every time. And these are typically bound up in a kind of brand promise, and they're often global. On the flip side, there's things that individuals and small and local companies do that is much, much better than what big companies do. And I think of those as individual strengths. And so what are those things? Localization and customization and specialization. And if you think about the history of industrialization, it has been all about ripping out this local, customized and specialized to build big, standardized things and get economies of scale and the prices down. So big companies can do that kind of work. They hate it, way too expensive. And so if you put these 2 things together, in fact, it is really, really complementary skill sets. And what has changed is now the internet exists, and dealing with lots of small parts has very low transaction costs. So we have this opportunity to have this brand new collaboration that never, ever could happen before, in which we're getting the best of both worlds. So the Inc. builds the platform for participation, and the peers deliver the diversity of offering. And if I simplify this, I think that it's kind of a yin-yang, where it's very complementary and symbiotic, and each side is leaving enough value on the table for the other side to participate. And it's all swimming in this sea of excess capacity. So I'm going to go through these 3 things to elaborate a little bit on them. So with excess capacity, what is fantastic about it is that it's resource efficient, and I'm an environmentalist, and it's cost efficient, and I'm a business person, and I'm always looking about those costs. I'm defining excess capacity as something that already exists. It's already been paid for, but there's more value there. And I want you to profoundly not just think of physical objects. I'm going to try to give you examples that are on all sorts of things, but it's networks, keystrokes, experiences, time of day, not just physical objects. And so think in your own lives, in your own industries, in your own company, where is there excess capacity? Once you identify it, there's 3 things you can do with it. Number 1, you can slice it, which is what Zipcar did. Instead of having you buy an entire car or rent a car for 24 hours, always buying more than you actually wanted, Zipcar said, we're going to let you pay just for what you want. You're going to pay for it by the hour and by the day. You only pay for what you need. Or you could, oops, and here actually, I threw this in. WeWork is an example of that. So instead of renting an entire month, renting it for a long lease period, WeWork, founded in 2010 with 110 locations, you can just pay for what you're going to consume in terms of office space. And here they are 6 years later, $1 billion in revenues, valued at $20 billion. That is a phenomenal thing. And it's this example of slicing this thing that you used to have to buy big. Or you could aggregate, and that's what Airbnb did. It took 1 million little tiny spaces around the globe, put them together on a platform where they share one insurance product, and they share the way that you communicate and pay, so you compare and contrast. And that feels fundamentally different than 1 million bed and breakfasts around the world, right? A totally different thing. Or you could open it up and say, hey, what new ideas do you have? And I'd say that opening up of things is, in fact, the most exciting and powerful way that we can leverage excess capacity. And my example here would be open data. So McKinsey has this report. 40 countries have opened up their data, 1 million data sets, and McKinsey says, whoa, there's $3 trillion worth of value in there. So just think, this was data that the governments and the transit authorities paid for, enjoyed, used, completely happy with it, and by making these standard open APIs, which is the platform, there's $1 trillion worth of, $3 trillion worth of brand new value that can be extracted out of that. So if I think about this harnessing excess capacity for you guys, which you should be thinking about, I was thinking, okay, so this idea of slicing, that's what we did with Zipcar and WeWork did, but what about in the retail sector? We're still having these big lumps that you have to buy. So what would it look like to have retail space by the hour or by the day? Or thinking about aggregating. What's the Airbnb of retail space? So enabling owners to rent out their space by the hour and by the day. What would that, for retail, what would that look like? Or opening it up entirely, saying, okay, where's my excess capacity in reception areas and basements and rooftops and open space and my excess heat? Can I make that available for others to harness and engage with? And what new ideas might those people come up with that I would never even conceive of? So think about this idea of excess capacity very seriously. I think if I'd say nothing else, that's one that you should be taking home as a really interesting piece. This was something I got from Sidewalk Labs. Here's what the space looks like in the daytime, and here it is repurposed at night to be something totally different. So how can we make flexible and multi-purpose spaces and really extracting out all the value? If I think about the ink, what does the ink deliver? The ink delivers a platform for participation with its platformness. And what does the platform do? It organizes all the small parts. It makes a complex transaction really simple. And importantly, it gives the power of the large entity to the small guys. And if you're lucky, you can get these economies of scale and very high growth. And my example here would be a company called BlaBlaCar, which is real ride sharing. If you want to go from Paris to Berlin in your own car, you have your 3 empty seats, they will let you sell those seats. And this growth curve is very typical for platform companies. They were actually founded in 2006. It takes a long time to get your platform right. You're iterating. Once you get it right, you have this potential for incredibly exponential growth. This company now moves 4 million people every single month, same as 10,000 high-speed trains or 10,000 747s, yet they did not lay a track, buy a rail car, buy a plane, right? All harnessing excess capacity on a platform for participation, inviting in the collaboration of others. So what do the peers do? The peers deliver this diversity of offering, and it's why this business model basically beats out every other one, because we've finally been able to get the value delivered from that diversity. And so it's the diversity that's giving us innovation and resilience and redundancy. And my example here is smartphones and apps. If you think about the apps, think about the smartphone and the operating system, that is an incredibly complex thing that costs hundreds of millions of dollars. Whereas the apps are theoretically things that an individual could be making themselves or a small group of people. And since smartphones have been invented, we've seen about 2 million apps. Many of them are similar, but many are not. And why did we get this profusion of creativity and innovation? Because it was individuals in their own sectors and their own life experiences to say, hey, with this smartphone device and these open APIs, what the heck could I do with that? What could I imagine doing with that? And it was this creativity of all of us that made this possible. And the other excess capacity is that I bought my smartphone for 5 killer apps, for $600 or $1,000. All the other apps are free riders on my investment, on my purchase. So it's this multiplicity of leveraging excess capacity. So every single app that you have on your phone is a peers in collaboration, because you're giving it your contacts, you're giving it your GPS, and you're giving it a free device that I didn't have to be persuaded to buy. If I think about this Peers Inc., what is fascinating to me is it has these characteristics that are incredible. And so I think of them as miraculous. And before I tell you those miracles, I want to make you incredibly depressed. So now is the time for 2 minutes of depression. What's the most depressing thing? Climate change. And so I'm going to show you a chart that says, globally, is this year hotter or colder than the 20th century average? And if you've been born since 1980, you have never experienced a colder than average year from a planet perspective. Here's 2015, here's 2016, here's 2017, and you know what you're feeling when you're walking outside right now. We've already almost warmed the planet by 1 degree centigrade. And scientists are telling us that we'll be seeing plus 5 or 6 degrees by 2100 with business as usual. So if you're like me, you have no idea what does it feel like to warm a planet by 5 or 6 degrees centigrade. What in heck does that mean? How could I ever understand that number? So I did some research, and I went and looked and said, okay, when was the last time it was 4.5 degrees cooler? That was the last ice age 20,000 years ago. And these are little images of skylines under glaciers. And so all of North America and Europe was under a glacier, and if I could reach those screens, I could show you where I live in Boston, and my bed would be under 1.5 kilometers of ice. So that's what 20,000 years and 4.5 degrees look like. We are going forward that amount in 85 years. So lest you have any inkling that maybe this is not an existential crisis, as in, will you exist? This is an existential crisis. So my friend Benny at Stanford has this nice sentence. You can't solve exponential problems with linear solutions, and that is what we have been doing. And so I want to say, try Piers Inc. And so here are the miracles, which I'm sure you're ready for. So miracle number 1. Because we're leveraging excess capacity, we can defy the laws of physics. If in 2000 I had said, instead of saying I'm going to invent Zipcar, I said, hey, I'm going to build 650,000 rooms in 100 countries, I'm doing it in 4 years. All of you experts in this room would have said, Robin, physically impossible. You can't go get the land, have the architect design it, go finance it, build it, put in the furniture, get the staff, have people come, do it in 4 years. Physically impossible. We have in complete agreement. So here's what business as usual asset building would look like over 6 years. And here's Airbnb. And why? Because they leveraged existing excess capacity on a platform for participation and invited in the collaboration of others. And this is why you get this kind of scale. And so if I think about addressing climate change or any single big problem you want to talk about, we have to start working with existing assets on a platform for participation. Miracle number 2. Because we're building on platforms, we can tap exponential learning. Learning is all about numbers of iterations and how many iterations do you get in your lifetime. And we know that companies get more iterations so they can learn faster. And if we think about platform companies that are seeing lots of transactions, they can learn even faster still. So my example here is going to be learning a foreign language. And the unit of measurement for that is what you can learn in a semester of college, 130 hours. It used to be that the Rosetta Stone was the number 1, very expensive, and you would buy it because, wow, in 54 hours, I'm going to be able to learn a semester of college. And that was great, and your boss was paying, and so you would definitely buy it. My new favorite company is a company called Duolingo, which does online free language learning. When I talked to that CEO, he says every single question they ask is an A/B test, meaning they ask half the people one way and half the people in another way. Overnight, 150,000 people will take that test, and they will know by the next morning which is the better way to ask the question so that people learn the answer. And so they have it down to 34 hours in which they can reliably teach you a semester of a language. And why do I say reliably? Because this company is now just 4 years old, and they have 50 million people actively every month learning languages on its platform. And you say, what was the excess capacity? The excess capacity was how Robin Chase fails on exams was thrown away for 59 years, and Louis Van Aan, CEO of Duolingo, said, wow, there's some really interesting information I can extract out of that to improve my entire company. Miracle number 3. Because we work with a diversity of peers, the right person will appear. And I don't mean Superman. Like Superman, whatever, he's strong and can fly. Everyone in this room is better than Superman because you have your smartphone and you can know what is the history, who are the experts, what's the weather, what's the best path. And my example here will be back to Airbnb. In December 2014, Obama said, I'm going to normalize relations with Cuba. 6 months later, there were 2,000 listings in Cuba. You cannot do it any other way. So the thing to remember is that Peers Inc. is a collaboration. It requires both of these parties. We can't have exponential growth if we don't have the platform organizing and unleashing this excess capacity and the peers co-investing. We can't tap exponential learning if we don't have the hundreds of thousands of crazy ways people do things and the platform doing the analysis and saying, whoa, best practice, I'm going to make that easy. Whoa, worst practice, I'm going to make it really hard. You can't, the right person won't appear unless you have the platform doing this crazy supercomputing that say, hey, here's the needle out of the haystack right at this minute that you want it. So in conclusion, if I think about the old way to extract the most value out of any resource that I want to call was industrial capitalism, which I will define by what was, the company was defined with a very strong barrier around it. And what was in the company, was out the company was very clear. And we protected the company with patents and copyrights and trademarks and certifications. And that used to be the way you would extract the most value out of things. But today, the internet exists, this new organizational structure is possible, and we've entered the collaborative economy, where who owns this asset? Is this work time or personal time? Is this commercial use or residential use? Are these assets employees owned by whom and used by whom? It's all this big, slippery, fuzzy thing. And so I'm going to leave you with 4 principles, 4 points that for me are true. And if you agree that these are true, then you too believe that we have left the age of industrial capitalism and are moving to the collaborative economy. So, number 1, shared networked assets deliver more value than closed proprietary ones. And we know it happens 2 ways. 1, the asset is used more efficiently, and the second is brand new value is extracted. So shared networked assets deliver more value. You guys are really smart, and we've always known that there's more smart people outside of this room statistically. Because the internet exists, I can find them. So more networked minds, more creative, more whatever you want, than the people inside this room, inside your company, inside your city, inside your state, inside your country. It is just the facts. It is true. There are more smarter people outside. So more networked minds are better than fewer proprietary minds. If I think about the benefits and opportunities of shared open assets, they are larger than the problems associated with that. If I think about when I was building Zipcar, the people who did not invest would say, oh, Robin, people are going to scratch the cars and they're going to damage it and not tell you about it. You know what? A small percentage of people do ruin those things. And that problem surfaces. And we penalize them. And when they keep doing bad things, we kick them out. Meanwhile, there are 1 million people sharing 13,000 cars parked around the world. Lastly, I'm very selfish. I only do things for myself. And when I participate in these, I get more than I give. So I make 3 hours of reservations on Zipcar, and I, Robin Chase, personally have a car in cities around the world. Wikipedia, I edit to an article on Wikipedia, and I personally have access to 5 million entries in the world's largest encyclopedia. I put in my little tiny thing, and I get this whole big thing. So I get more than I give. And if I think about the world we're in right now, which is so incredibly dynamic, the pace of technology change is so incredible, climate change is pouring down upon us, what is the future of capitalism, what is the future of work? What I know is that this structure is the structure that enables us to experiment, iterate, evolve, and adapt at the fastest pace. And so yes, I did put this in a book, but you guys should be thinking, how do I Peers Inc. my company? What are the assets?
Thanks, Robin. It's a hard act to follow. I think points well taken. I think as we apply those points to real estate, it becomes even more impactful. I think WeWork and Airbnb are 2 good examples, but these types, Peers Inc. is creating entirely new asset classes, repurposing existing asset classes, creating incredible investment opportunity across the ecosystem of real estate. And I mean, you can credit Robin for sort of bringing this about, and really the AV deck that I'm going to walk through today, the foundation of that is really built on what she did at Zipcar. So it's a privilege to be on stage right now. The driverless car, how's that going to affect real estate? I probably get asked this question. The first question I get asked all the time is WeWork worth $20 billion? The second most asked question I get is, how are driverless cars going to affect real estate values? And when you think about at least what you read in the media today, and everybody talks about Lyft, and they talk about Uber, and they talk about Google, and all this stuff, That is the least important question, in my opinion, in the sense that there are city blocks in New York whose market cap is bigger than Uber and GM and sort of the automobile industry. The value that's going to be created and destroyed in real estate is going to dwarf whatever value gets created in the automotive industry by the advent of autonomous cars. And that's going to affect everybody sitting in this room in real and meaningful ways. I'll get into the specifics of how I think that's going to occur and what asset classes will be affected. I do not have a crystal ball. And honestly, this is a conversation I think everybody in this room needs to have. And I think the only way we figure out how to evolve with this car is by working together and having these types of conversations. So I'm just going to start to scratch the surface. Why am I even up here and why are you listening to me? Hopefully by the end of the presentation that'll become clear, but let me at least pitch myself first. So I run a venture capital firm called Fifth Wall. It's a VC firm focused exclusively on built world technology. It's just a fancy word for real estate tech. We are funded by the largest real estate owners and operators in the world for a very specific reason, in that I want to know what these guys are doing before the market does. And when I know that, I want to invest. That's really what the fund is premised on, and I can give my portfolio companies access to over half a trillion dollars in real estate and over 7 billion square feet. That's a sandbox that any entrepreneur would want to play in. And when you think about how technology is infiltrating the built world, that's only going to happen in partnership with the large incumbents. There is no kid in the Stanford dorm room right now coding on his laptop who's going to disrupt Prologis. He doesn't have $60 billion in his pocket. It's not to say he won't change the way people think about industrial and access it and all those things, but unlike these other industries that were sort of born out of technology, social media, things like that, the real estate industry isn't going anywhere. It needs all of you. It needs the capital markets. It needs regulation. All the things that make real estate what it is today cannot be undone. And the technology companies that define the future, I think, are going to be most successful working in collaboration with the industry, not against it. I won't get into the background because that's just going to embarrass me again after kind of listening to Robin's talk. Although I will highlight one thing, and I'll challenge Robin's the number one principle of you can't defy physics. The only way you can defy physics in real estate tech if Blackstone backs you. We were able to buy 55,000 homes in less than 3 years. That's like a little under 200,000 beds that we owned, managed, rehabbed, and rented. I'm not going to live much longer than probably 70 after that, but who wants to live that long anyway? This is the thing that we're talking about. There is a meteor coming to real estate. It's coming fast, and like I said before, it's going to destroy and create more value than anything you've seen in the past 100 years. If you do not have a strategy on how AVs are going to affect whatever real estate asset classes you are investing in, you are woefully behind the 8 ball. I can't tell you exactly when this is going to happen, but this should be something you should be thinking about, and we can talk about the specific asset classes that might be affected. To know where you're going, it probably helps to know where you've been. Read about Robert Moses. I just wanted to throw this up there in terms of this is the man who sort of spearheaded this automotive city. The world in which we lived in today was pioneered by guys like Robert Moses, who saw the advent of the car and helped facilitate essentially the good and the bad that the car created in the environment that we occupy today. What automobiles define in our modern built world is pretty much everywhere you look, from the streetscapes, and I would imagine in another 50 years there's going to be a picture. The horse is going to be like a car today, and then that train is going to be, or those automobiles are going to be the AVs of the future, and we're going to be in that weird flux for a little while. But the entire streetscape is going to change. Freeways and suburbanization. To Robin's point about environmental impact, the suburbanization of America was the single worst decision our country ever made in the sense of what it meant for the environmental impact. Suburban sprawl is the most inefficient way for human beings to live. Obviously, the economic impact that created for America was unquestionable. AVs are hopefully going to help solve a little bit of that, but cars did have a negative impact, and it created this suburban sprawl, and it made things extremely inefficient. It also increased the urban sprawl, creating much larger MSAs. That's only going to increase, I think, with AVs. There's a profound change coming, and it's going to affect the entire infrastructure of real estate. This is why we wrote a piece about Trump's infrastructure plan and the hope that whatever administration can work their way to actually engage in this infrastructure issue that we have is that they build that infrastructure for the future. They don't just repair it for today. If we invest billions of dollars in US infrastructure and it doesn't have a technology slant to it, we are going to be building the wrong infrastructure, and we're going to be spending billions and trillions of dollars very soon to fix it. There are countries that are far further ahead than us in terms of how they think about infrastructure evolution. Let's ask some key questions. Everybody always asks, where are we today in terms of technological progress? Autonomous vehicles today are pretty much capable in driving almost all driving modalities. I think Google's logged 3 million miles. I think there's been over 30,000 rides in Pittsburgh with Uber in autonomous vehicles. They exist today. They're not on the road at scale. They're mainly in testing. But the concept of an AV works. Your Tesla, if Elon Musk wanted to, can turn into an honest vehicle in his factory with a flip of a switch. That's why he's built what he's built. The infrastructure is already available to us. Other things still have to happen: cost accessibility, and then regulatory approval. The House unanimously passed a few months ago AV legislation. It's probably the only thing they've done in the past year, and that is actually putting things on a really great path to increase the usage of AVs at the state level. So I'd say, just a double click here, consensus right now is 2025. I don't know if that's true or not. Just know that when that mass commercialization does occur, it's going to hockey stick. This isn't gonna be a tick. My 19-month-old son will never learn how to drive, and he'll think we're all crazy for ever having tried it. That I can say for sure. There's already proof points that are sort of pointing to the impact of this. A lot of these topics are actually kind of highly debated, especially car ownership. There's a lot of conflicting reports. But right now, Lyft and Uber are proving that if you put these shared vehicles on the road, car ownership it decreases and vehicles come off the road. If you've been in New York and LA and San Francisco lately, that doesn't seem to be the case, but we don't have enough data to prove it. What I can say with certainty is that demand for parking is way down. And that's based on my own research of talking to hundreds of CEOs of real estate companies. All of them are asking me, what the heck do I do with all this parking? And this just sort of begs the question, sort of, what does this mean for US roadway and real estate infrastructure? A whole host of things. How we commute, how we park, how we live, how we work, how we get away, how we shop, how we build, how we store. Again, just scratching the surface, and we could debate each and every one of these things. The stats around some of this stuff are pretty incredible when you actually dig in. 73 minutes driving per day on average with Americans. 124 billion in economic development robbed by congestion in the U.S. Annual cost for traffic for each American, $1,700. That doesn't even take into account the fact that they probably, in an autonomous world, they probably don't even own their cars, so there's additional savings that could occur. 3 million in sort of emissions, damage to the environment. There's economic impacts to the environment as well. So lots of different things that happen based on the way we drive today. Again, with decreasing traffic and more comfortable commutes, the productivity savings are dramatic. There's so much time, like we said, wasted kind of at 10 and 2 on a daily basis, and if you can work, sleep, be entertained during your commute, that opens you up to do a whole host of different things that are hopefully much more productive. This is just sort of what we look like in terms of what vehicle ownership could evolve into. Right now we're at owner dependence with a little bit of shared dependence, Uber, Lyft, and Zipcar. On the bottom right quadrant, we'll eventually move to a little bit more owned autonomy in terms of autonomous family cars. Some people, at least in sort of the generations like mine who are used to owning their own cars, might choose to have an AV that they own. But eventually, I just think it makes sense that we move to complete shared autonomy and having driverless, essentially a network of driverless cars at our disposal. How we park, again, super staggering stats. Billion spaces in the US, 4 for every person, for every vehicle. 61 billion square feet of parking space ripe for redevelopment. A lot of that's infill. 50% reduction in parking requirements over the next 30 years. I think it's actually more than that. There are already groups taking advantage of these trends. It's happening locally. Parking ratios are a big thing, and people are being creative about how they can get cities to relax those and leverage the shared vehicle ecosystem. There's a shameless plug for Cincinnati, where I'm from. Gensler built an office tower that has 3 levels of parking that have traditional office facade that can be converted if and when the city lets them. So there's different ways that you can prepare for this eventuality. How we live, Suburbanization 2.0, the reversal of transportation premiums. Whether it's shopping malls or it's office buildings, but sort of transit-oriented real estate has always been somewhat of a gem in terms of the location and the rental premium that provides. When sort of public transportation becomes more ubiquitous with autonomous vehicles, there's a chance that the premiums on those assets actually decrease. So thinking about that impact on how that affects sort of suburban real estate is going to be super impactful. Below, you just see the spread that exists today that could very well reverse. How we work, we're already seeing this happen with WeWork and others, but AVs make commutes much more interesting in terms of where companies can recruit and access workforce. Does it have to be in the cities? Can it be far afield? Can you move to different cities and activate a larger workforce based on AVs? There's a whole host of thoughts around will urbanization increase or decrease with the advent of AVs? It's our view that urbanization continues to increase, but there's a lot of data that points the other way. How we commute or how we get away, hospitality and lodging. This is going to be a big one. Motel 6s, red roof inns. If you don't need to stop on a hotel-adjacent hospitality asset, why would you when you can sleep in your car? Do all those assets just go away? So there's a whole, and again, this is premised on a form and function change of AVs, and will hopefully change the way people choose to travel. How we shop, this is a big one. Everybody is always talking about right now. This is the death of retail, and AVs are only going to help facilitate that. What I think it does is provide opportunities for well-located mall owners to turn their malls into what they've always been, or at least they've meant to be, which is community centers. These are the town halls, and they've shied away from that, and now have the opportunity to move back by creating more nuance and experiential retail that's catered to that local community that they serve, and the parking that they can redevelop will allow them to do that. We work very closely with Macerich, who's actually based here in LA, to think about the parking opportunities of activating those parking lots to create really new experiential ways to engage their tenants and their customers. E-commerce, the way we shop, you're already starting to see this. Last mile is on the tip of everyone's tongue. Amazon's getting into the game in a big way. Prologis, one of our anchors, is building one of the first multi-level industrial assets in San Francisco and Seattle. These are premised on the fact that last mile is going to become increasingly more important over time. We're even starting to hear whisperings of last 10 feet in the sense of when that autonomous vehicle shows up at your house, how does that package get to your doorstep, whether that's through a drone or a robot. We were really trying to solve every part of this thing, and so there's going to be massive implications here. Prologis has been lucky to sort of be the beneficiary of technology. They're performing extremely well because of where their industrial assets are located. They've always been more infill, and they're riding this wave. But thinking about how autonomous fleets and all those things and intermodal facilities are going to impact their business, they're definitely investing in a lot of technology that is premised on the advent of autonomous vehicles actually occurring in commercial fleets first. The cost obviously is a big driver of that. How we build, this is actually not happening as much in the US, but it's actually happening overseas at scale. Singapore actually is like mandate. They've just decided instead of like telling people not to drive, they're literally just shutting entire highways down. You're going to see, in I think very short order, entire freeways and byways literally converted to parks and walkways. That's not going to happen here anytime soon, but I think with the advent of AVs, that will become the parks and the living spaces that we're going to enjoy are going to be enabled by AVs because there's going to be space savings and streets are going to be much safer. I'll give you 2 examples of how Fifth Wall thinks about investing with this trend. How we build is changing. AVs infiltrating the construction industry is actually pretty interesting. There's massive labor shortage in construction right now, especially with high quality labor that focuses on large construction equipment. AV technology actually works really well on bulldozers and pretty much any construction equipment, especially for like large grading projects. Lire, being one of our anchor investors, is super interested in how they can leverage AV technology to potentially grade some of their large tract homes. These can work all day, every day without resting. They can work at night if the city will let them, and they do a much better job of actually getting to the specific specifications of the grading that's required in order to build the home, and there's tons of cost savings associated with leveraging AV technology. How we store, self-storage is going to change. We invested in a company called Clutter. It's actually based here in LA. This is sort of premised on the fact that if you're buying infill self-storage, you probably shouldn't be, in the sense that self-storage is just an asset class that exists in the absence of technology, in the sense that the only reason why self-storage facilities exist in infill locations is because you need to be close to your stuff to access it. But with logistics technology, why can't you store your stuff far afield, have Clutter come pick up your stuff, barcode it, make it rentable on your phone, take your things, don't store all your stuff in a box, but take your mattress and store it with everybody else's mattress, so it's stored more efficiently, and do it in sort of the vacant square footage of an underperforming industrial asset far afield. The cost savings are real. The customer experience is far better. It's changing the scope and scale of what self-storage should and could be in the future, renting your things on demand. And here are just some actionable investment opportunities that we can debate and talk about, but the tailwinds seem pretty obvious. Urban parking lots for redevelopment, CBD office space, rural warehouses, last mile storage facilities, well-located infill or suburban malls with large surface parking. The best thing about well-located malls is that the mall industry doesn't actually, when someone builds a mall in an infill location, it's not like there's another major mall right down the street. They just go somewhere else. So these malls actually have very well-located infill redevelopment opportunities in some of the best cities in the US. New development with no on-site parking, reduced parking ratios, obvious stuff. Autonomous car headwinds, airport parking lots. You shouldn't be buying airport parking lots. I think LA is actually going to build a massive sort of parking lot to facilitate rental cars, which is going to be the biggest waste of money, I think, ever. Suburban office, we talked about. Infill self-storage, we talked about. Suburban commodity retail. Convenience is now rentable online and at home, so convenience in physical locations is going to be much harder to articulate. Highway adjacent hotels we discussed. That's our presentation. This is a massive opportunity, and I'm excited to continue this conversation with all of you. And I think there's possibility for real estate destruction, but there's also possibility for a lot of opportunity. So thank you very much.
I think what we're seeing, the interstate highway system fundamentally changed our built environment. Now we're seeing autonomous vehicles have the potential to fundamentally change our built environment in as much of a significant way, if not more. Robin and I have had brief chats about a different view of autonomous vehicles. Do you want to share that?
So write down to go look up YouTube Robin Chase self-driving cars. I have this 4-minute video, which is the heaven versus hell scenario, and we're going to get we're going to get the hell scenario if we just sit around and wait for things to play out. Because the cost of moving a self-driving car, if it's electric, will be $1 an hour. So I just want you to put in your mind, you can move your car for $1 an hour. You will never park it. You will have it circle the block so I can continue to have a good conversation. Our streets will be 100% parking lots, clogged, disgusting, horrible things. And that is what is going to play out if we just let things go, because that is profoundly, economics will drive it, and the economics of self-driving cars, when you take out the driver, for taxis, minus 65% of the costs, gone. So it's just dirt cheap. We know what happens when we underprice things. The flip side, the heaven side, which I want to encourage you all to fight hard, tooth and nail, because it will just make your lives fantastic, is we only need 10% of the cars we have on the streets if we do some car sharing and only have, I want to call them, fleets of autonomous vehicles that are electric and shared, faves. And we can, if we do that, there's no on-street parking. We can repurpose all of those parking lots. I feel like this is a do-over for cities. We get this do-over for cities, completely transforming livability, transforming do we need green space here, more affordable housing, a hospital, retail, whatever it is, we now have the space. And it will just completely transform cities. So I'm yearning for us to do the better path, but it requires that we address things that the world doesn't want to talk about, which is underpriced on-street parking, underpriced CO2 emissions, air pollution, underpriced congestion. And we have to address those things before autonomous vehicles hit, because otherwise it will be just terrible.
And let me add, we started a little bit late, so we're going to go a little bit later. I'm sure there's someone from ULI out there who's terrified that we're not going to keep to the ending schedule. But this conversation could go on for much longer than 15 minutes, obviously. If you have questions, come to the mics, and we're not going to wait till the end for questions, so please come on up. You both mentioned something about surface parking lots. We have a ton of them, especially here in LA and downtown. They've been changing a little bit, but at airports, at shopping malls, wherever it might be. If they become obsolete, do we then have a land glut?
Can I just give you a statistic, just a statistic that I was just told? On average in US cities, 30% of the land use is car associated, which is 30%. And there's a study that was done of Houston, and it was 67% goes to cars, parking lots. It's just astounding. So yeah, just imagine.
Well, I mean, the important thing to double click on there is the affordability issue in most major cities. And I think with more square footage comes more developable area, and hopefully with the right people and the right priorities becomes solutions to those very important problems.
So, but if we're then maybe not getting rid of, but if we're automating construction, if we're automating driving, right, there's a lot of jobs that start to disappear.
Sure.
And maybe the costs come down, but it sounds like that has a potential to wreck an economy.
AVs replacing the trucking industry is going to be one of the biggest economic issues we'll probably face in quite some time, because that's the second largest employer in the US right now. This is the technology existential question that we're all going to wrestle with. I don't have the answer. I'm definitely not smart enough to answer that question. But you're right. I mean, we have to think responsibly about how technology creates heaven and hell scenarios.
Just some statistics around that. Yes, it's going to create what I like about the autonomous vehicle job loss is that it is pervasive across all economies, urban and rural. It's not going to be Democrat versus Republican. It's not going to be white versus minorities, because there are drivers in every one of those categories in every geography. So it gives us the opportunity to refresh the social contract with labor. What are our responsibilities? And we're going to have an opportunity to rethink about that discussion. The piece around job loss versus job gain I also want to put in is that from a transportation perspective, there's these two longitudinal studies that Harvard did, that the single largest barrier to escaping poverty is access to high quality transportation. So while this is cutting off a bunch of jobs, your ability to go find jobs that are farther and harder to get to is dramatically improved. And so on that balance, there'll be many more people who are getting access to jobs than are losing jobs, but it's definitely a drama, and we have to think about what we want to do on that.
Yeah, and the cost benefit that you mentioned just plays into that. Yeah.
So it seems like coming out of the Great Recession, which still wasn't that long ago, that seemed to be the rise of a lot of the sharing economy. Was that a response to the downturn? And one of the questions I hear a lot, what happens in the next downturn? We haven't been through a scenario where WeWork or any of the shared services, if you will, have lived through a downturn.
I want to speak to that. So
Great.
Zipcar was founded in 2000. And it was totally fascinating to me. So I will remind you of September 2001. We had just launched in Washington, D.C. And it was with extreme excitement that I called up my board members. And I want to remind you, car rental completely flatlined, travel basically flatlined, and Zipcar grew 20% that month. And I could say, you know what, this is a utility, whether it's a good time or a bad time, people want to be sharing these vehicles and using them to drive. So I think the sharing economy took off in the areas, times you're talking about, because that was when smartphones were becoming cheap and ubiquitous, GPS and apps were being built. So it was the beginning of this easy access. I want to say the sharing economy that I think is different from the collaborative economy is sharing physical stuff. We've seen its success in those places of the most expensive items, houses and cars. And stuff sharing has been hard coming because the transaction costs for really small benefits are still challenging. That said, I think there's just, in the real estate space, there is so much idle, built and unbuilt space. It's just, you just walk down the street and you look at all those ground floors of reception area languishing, or the unused gym, or the unused swimming pool. Like, what could you be doing that?
Soon to be unused parking spaces.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I mean, it's not entirely true that there hasn't been a company that has a similar business model to go through a recession. Regis was around well before WeWork. Okay. It's not to say that the business model was exactly the same, but similar concepts in terms of the construct it was built on, and they filed for bankruptcy. Whether or not technology is just a faster road to the bottom, I think to your point, is actually an interesting thing. And I think with the next economic downturn, we'll see how resilient they are. But I think the reason why a lot of these companies, I think, grew out of the recession was, I think, really premised on what Robin did leading up to that in terms of, I think the mobile phone point's a really good one. But changing consumer behavior is super hard, just like building a marketplace. And I think the changing of the hearts and minds that Robin was able to do with Zipcar, I think just like perfectly coincided with that, with the downturn, so that coming out of it, the consumer base was better educated to access those types of things, and allowed them to grow a lot faster. Because Airbnb didn't have to convince somebody to have a room in somebody's house, or convince somebody that they should have a smaller workspace. So I think it was a perfect timing for that.
And just feeding on that, one of the interesting things when I was doing Zipcar, which is easy to say to you guys, is that the benefits, this changed mental model of accessing an asset instead of owning it. So instead of you guys are all, most of you are driving around in your minivan without any children, whether or not you're going to on a hot date with your spouse, going to visit some business meeting, driving in downtown traffic, whereas what Zipcar showed was, whoa, who'd have thought that I can get the car that meets the trip? And I can have a car in every city in the world in 30 seconds. In 30 seconds, I can have the car where you're still, and I never maintain them. So these huge benefits to sharing that is way outweighs ownership, I have to say. And you spend less in a year. So I look at it and I think, when we were in that mindset, we thought that was the best mindset. But when you go into this different way, it's dramatically better.
And it's really about a more perfect union between supply and demand. And whether that's rendered in the sharing economy, or even just in the sense that in the residential housing industry today, I'm sure everyone here has a strike price on their home, in the sense that everyone here would sell their home if someone offered them a certain dollar amount. And the fact that isn't rendered across the U.S. to make sort of moving more easy, and everybody's transient now. The fact that it's so difficult to get out of these assets, especially when the price tag goes up. That's what this is really bringing about, and a lot of these companies are taking that theme and applying it. And I think whether or not it's a marketplace or a transaction platform, the more perfect union supply and demand is going to create a lot more opportunity.
Yes, I love that as a really short form of that. And I was just spending a couple years in Paris where people don't own houses, and I was thinking about the U.S. when the labor market shifts. We are stuck and bound by our stupid house. Yes. Like, I can't be as fluid as I want when I'm owning this asset. And so that would be an incredibly negative aspect of ownership versus rental. And so there's these really great aspects of rentals that I can follow the job markets, and I don't get stuck.
Yeah.
So you said everyone wants to talk about WeWork, so I don't want to disappoint you. I'm going to ask you a question about WeWork.
Okay.
So they just spent $850 million to buy Lord & Taylor in Manhattan.
Yep.
And it's...
Has anybody been in Lord & Taylor in New York in any time in the last 10 years?
No, tell me.
Yeah.
Like a handful. Okay.
Okay.
Where is that?
It's on Fifth Avenue. It's an iconic building.
So you have an A location in a prime city,
Yeah.
possibly at market peak or close to it, possibly, and you have an old school retailer converting the building, converting to a new economy, if you will, office user.
Yeah.
Is this a single transaction or a larger
Listen,
signal?
WeWork has done incredible things. They've done two really things that I take advantage of every day. One, they've proven to office owners that office space isn't a commodity, and their tenants aren't tenants, they're customers. And the other thing that I'm betting from is they've woken the sleeping giants. Every major landlord right now wants to understand how shared space is going to affect their buildings, and they want to be a part of that trend. And it's really just premised on the fact that, and it's the same sort of logic applies, you don't own an office building, you don't own a multifamily asset. You own space, and people pay you to access that space, and you need to be in a position to provide whatever accommodates that customer. You need to provide the space that accommodates that changing and growing need. And I think Adam and the guys at WeWork have done an incredible job of doing that at scale. What happens, and this is sort of VC run amok, is that you get massive capital infusions, and then you start to have to make decisions to justify your valuation. The only way to justify a $20 billion valuation today is to own $20 billion in assets. The recent article that he said that our multiple is on spirituality and enthusiasm is sort of, I think, a symptom of that. WeWork's model isn't going away. This is not a fad. This is where the workplace is going. It's not going to infiltrate 100% of it. It's important, but buying assets at the top of the market isn't going to help.
Question.
Hi. One of the blindfolds that we have with new technology is that we tend to think of it in relation to how things have worked before. So with autonomous vehicles, do you see it more as people going to place, as more as transportation or more as architecture? Or so are things coming to people or are people going to things? And how does that change our urban?
For me, that's a good question. And I was just reading about Trump's executive order tomorrow to make it easier to have drones. And I think if we don't address the costs to people in the cities, we'll be using cars and drones to deliver Robin toilet paper because she's too lazy to go downstairs. Let me open the window so I don't have to walk 2 blocks to CVS. And how many people will that inconvenience? And so I think it's all about the cost piece and getting that cost right.
I mean, I think people ask the same question with the advent of the internet. Well, are people just going to sit in their homes all day and hang out online? Yes. Obviously proved not to be true. That's the most important question to answer. I don't think it makes us more insular. I think it enhances our ability to add to the community.
You both, in talking, sort of seem to give me the sense that you guys are very comfortable with the concept of supply, demand, price, using price as a way to figure out, where supply should be created and how to unlock that. I think everything that I'm seeing in sort of both national and local political debates and left and right is a complete discomfort with the concept of price. So when we see affordability, people don't want to hear that means that we should unlock some supply. And so I'm sort of wondering, what is this way? Do you have a way of talking about price that feels optimistic and exciting that we can use in our business in a way to push, our cities to where they need to be?
You can go or I can go. We both go.
I mean, for us, when talking to some of our bankers, it's about space. It's about thinking thoughtfully about space utilization and activating more square footage. Technology allows us to live in different forms and functions, and sort of building assets the way we've always built them. I think is a relic of the past and needs to change. And there's a whole host of things that will accelerate that. Sort of augmented reality and on all this stuff that's much farther down the line. But it's really about thinking more thoughtfully about, you have space, how do you activate more of it? How do you understand the demand that you could essentially the demand that you could essentially invite into that space, and just know more about it. I think when you build a multifamily asset, you price it based on sort of market comps, and you hope for the best. You can think much more creatively now that there's technology organizations have created different ways to render form and function differently.
I want to send you to another website that just got launched a week and a half ago called sharedmobilityprinciples.org. And those shared mobility principles was 10 NGOs. I got them together to come up with, here's what we all believe. We all in agreement about this part of transportation. And number one is that you need to be building cities and transportation together. And I was just at Uber yesterday talking to people, and I think there's this whole piece around storytelling, which includes one of your items around efficiency, that when you have housing and transportation together as costs from a city perspective, there's amazingly good arguments why we should be having more dense use, right? I think you guys all know those. And so continue to push that storyline that stops separating these two things together. When you think of them together, it is clear that we want to have dense mixed use that includes mixed economy within those, and that we want to figure out how to make better use of the streets, the lanes, the parking, the sidewalks, the land, because it is scarce. And oftentimes that requires in congested areas, so for the markets, for land, we do use markets to get the right price point, but we don't do that for curbs, pick up and drop off. We don't do that for parking. We don't do that for lanes, and we need to start introducing that. So it's in those shared mobility principles that I'm working with, hopefully, cities around the world and developers and everyone to, if we can all focus on these agreed principles and agreed that is best for cities, I think we can start teasing out stories that the private sector can talk to the public sector on.
And keep in mind, there are multiple parties that need to participate in making that a reality, right? It's very hard for you, let's say you own a multifamily asset, and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna do what's right. I'm gonna convert 50% of it into micro units so I can provide more affordability for more people. And then you go to get a refi on that building and the bank tells you, I can't underwrite this. What did you do? Like, I don't know what the cap rate's gonna be when you sell this. That requires capital markets, asset owners. The whole ecosystem needs to come together and say, this is what consumers want. How do we provide it to them? But how do we keep the constructs to keep you all engaged in investing in that future?
And we were talking earlier
hard.
about highest and best use plus.
Yeah, I want to say, I think we all agree, it's really hard, and there's so many different stakeholders, and all the existing regulation is not our friend, right? It is not pointing us towards this future. And so I just keep trying to, whenever we're doing regulatory stuff, talking policy, to point out, this is how we got into this mess, because of these rules. These rules all lead to the same backspace. So
how often are you guys getting involved in public policy discussions?
I'm in public policy discussions all the time, in that I'm talking to leaders of cities around the world whenever I can ever get a chance, which is monthly, weekly.
We're involved with quite a bit.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so you mentioned Uber, and companies like Uber and Airbus and even my company Air are working on incorporating some of this autonomous ground vehicle technology into aerial vehicles. So looking forward into a future where there's level 5 autonomy and we don't have to have a driver actually behind the wheel of our shared electric vehicles, what do you think, or at least why do you think we're limiting our thinking to enabling this ground vehicle transportation when autonomous aerial transportation offers some really unique solutions and potentially in a very similar timeline?
So I just want to speak to dense urban areas.
Okay.
The Jetsons, do you remember? He's standing at his door, he comes, he gets it. And I just was looking this up to take the clip. In something like 1997, they did a movie version of the Jetsons. And what I loved about that movie version of the Jetsons, which I just only have to say this particularly, is so you have him get into his little, he opens the sliding glass door on the 85th story, steps out, and he says, bye, honey, it goes. And then he goes out, and then it's like jam into the traffic jam in the sky. Of course, it's not as if we're going to be having, you can just fly anywhere at any time. Obviously, not going to happen. And so I feel like this answer is, it's not like it's free space. You're going to go up, and now you're going to have all the same rules, the same piece. And so for me, when I come back, I have to say, I'm giving you the argument against, is it's not like it's going to be free space. You're going to have very rigid areas in which you do it. And the impact on the millions of people who are living in those cities is going to be so much less value than what is being delivered. Although I did hear between 2 hospitals in Boston, they're medevacing by drone, some crazy thing. I think, great. So let's put a price on it, and you can't do toilet paper and toothpaste because I'm lazy. I didn't go get the book, deliver it to me. No.
Do you think the challenge of building physical roads as opposed to just kind of flying in airspace, even if it's still a traffic jam, do you think there's any value in not having to build that highway?
I think there is. So I was talking about dense urban areas, and so yes, in places in the Amazon, in Africa, where it's like terrible roads and whatever, and also not so populated, definitely. The infrastructure doesn't exist, and it's not bothering that dense a population, so I think there are use cases, but it's not in dense urban areas.
Are you looking at any?
Baby steps.
Airborne?
Come on.
Yeah.
I can't even begin to wrap my head around what it would take to make that a reality.
There's a number of startups.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's outside the realm of Heinz doesn't really care about the airspace above
Yes.
its towers
Okay.
right now.
It seems like both of these trends, the better utilization of excess capacity and autonomous vehicles, will impact more than anything else the largest real estate asset in the country, which is the detached single-family home. Obviously, as Robin noted, in other countries there are pretty wildly different approaches to home ownership, and I just wanted to see what you all think in, say, 20 years home ownership will look like in the United States, both from a numbers perspective, whether the overall number increases or not, but also what will the detached single-family home look like? Will it change in appearance because of these two trends?
Let me, before you answer, we have 2 more questions after that, and I think that's going to be all. So, home ownership.
I think in the short to medium term, I don't think the form and function of detached single family will change all that much. I think assuming that millennials are not going to move to the suburbs, I think is short-sighted. I'm a millennial. I haven't moved there yet, but I only have 1 kid. Come 2, I'm probably out of here. And that's just going to happen later. Will home ownership reach peak? Probably not. Lennar, the second largest home builder in the U.S., I don't know the answer to this question, but I would assume that organization doesn't think that they're going to get back to the housing starts that they had prior to the peak. And that's actually creating new and interesting opportunities for them to think about how to engage their customers well beyond the point of sale, which is pretty interesting. I think at least for the next generation, it's going to look similar, and you're going to see a lot of families go into the suburbs to access the schools and all the reasons why people do it today. But that leads to the hell scenario that we were referring to, in the sense of nothing. That's just doing more of the same. I'm not as optimistic about the heaven one.
Can I just, since this isn't the last question, I want to be the extreme Debbie Downer that my children would be saying, Robin, don't say what you're about to say. If you put climate change advanced by 20 years unaddressed, it's a totally different scenario. The refugee climate migration and the economic chaos that's about to happen, 20 years, it is going to be very, very, very chaotic. And so I want to say a lot of people in the environmental movement are thinking, what's their plan B? And that is a serious, so 20 years out for me, I can't even imagine 20 years out if we don't address this issue. And you just look at what's happened in the last year.
I guess one of the things I love about Elon Musk and Tesla is the fact that he's putting so much time or effort and energy in this people mover concept. I would love to get your opinion as someone who's invented Zip and someone who's doing an AV company. What's your opinion about the future of public transportation? Do you think it's important, or do you think public transportation and the way we use it, with ridership being down in buses, ridership being down in trains, is it just a reflection of how our society kind of dislikes each other?
That is such a, I want to say, as I've been thinking about this for the last year and a half, that is like I feel like that is where the battle, that's going to be the biggest fight. And I keep coming back to my price points, is that in New York City and in San Francisco right now, they're really pissed off. They've done studies on Uber and Lyft, and it's taken 7% ridership have come out of transit and into Uber and Lyft. And I think that is a rational choice, because I am during peak times, it is a rational choice, because I have crummy public transportation. You are letting me drive alone in my car down Fifth Avenue. That's a crazy thing. So I believe that we need to have a continuum of shared transport that's going to go from mass transit moving 1,000 people on a train up to 1 person in their car. And we need to make this, 2, 4, 6, 8, 12, 20 people, and then go into public transit. And we need to be paying congestion pricing per square yard of movement. That is the operative piece on streets. And if we can get that right and start talking about it today, in dense urban areas, in Manhattan, you profoundly need to have public transit. And when I talk about people in Mumbai and Bogota, they're moving 6 people per square yard. And some I was talking to when they're moving 12 people per square yard. So clearly people cannot be moving to taxis. We have to move massive numbers of people. And how do we finance that when it's during peak times and other peak times you want to? So we need to do congestion charging, we need to fund public transit, but in many places public transit will disappear. So in Bloomington, Indiana, they only have buses. It's a lightly settled place. I don't think there's going to be any public transit. I think we'll have private public transport. And then one just piece around income inequality and the heterogeneity of today's, in the major cities in the US, there is a economically heterogeneous people on public transit, so it's a place where people do meet up. In the self-driving world, even if I'm sharing with 4 or 6 other people from origin to destination, I'm going from my homogeneous, not inequality, fancy, poor place or rich place to my job, and I'm not going to be ever mixing with those other people because the origin destination points are not mixed. And so therefore, when I'm going origin destination, I will not mix.
So now we're
Sorry.
really going to get in trouble. So
Yes.
we have
Sorry.
to be a little quick. But
No,
we're
that
going
was
to get
good.
to
That
the
was
other
fine.
thought,
I don't
and
need
we
to
have a
add
last
to that.
question. No pressure.
The year 2025 seems to be the general consensus for widespread adoption, and I'm curious what that means for smaller Midwestern cities. This summer, I was on a dirt road on the way to our family farm, so I'm just curious, what does that mean in the year 2025?
I think there's still, I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. That's not really that rural, but it's definitely in the Midwest. Listen, I think it's that question of all modalities in terms of will AVs be able to sort of navigate, well-articulated roadways and not. I think for the time in the near term, you're probably going to be in your normal car doing that. But eventually, when mass commercialization takes place, that car should be able to navigate any situation you put it in, regardless of the fact that Google mapped it at some point in the past. That's really what mass commercialization means, in the sense that that car is capable of driving in any terrain at any time.
Just to put a fine point that when you read in the press about this, there are these different levels in automation, and level 5
That's
is
level
what you imagine, which is anytime, any place, anywhere. I think that is 25 or 30 years out.
Yeah.
But I think possibly by the end of this year, we're going to be seeing serious examples of level 4, which is geo-fenced, and that will be in some cities like Phoenix, where there's no snow and it's very flat and there's no pedestrians. And you'll be seeing it imminently, really short. So it's going to depend on what your city is, and level 4, which is geo-fenced. That's anytime.